So if the typical data center is a PUE of 1.5, which is quite good, then we get 1.5 by 0.5, we get 0.75 kilograms CO2 per kilowatt hour is the IT carbon intensity. It's how much the IT equipment is producing in terms of CO2. So if we have a data center with a good PUE, 1.2, and that good data center is drawing mostly from coal-fired power. So it's got a supply carbon intensity of 0.8 kilos. Then your 0.8 by 1.2 means you're producing, even though you've got a good PUE in your data center, you're producing 0.96 kilos CO2 per kilowatt hour. On the other hand, if you've got a really bad data center with a PUE of 3, very inefficient data center, PUE of 3, but it's fired mostly by renewables. So your carbon intensity on your supply is 0.2, which still, it's not 0, it's 0.2. It's significant. There's still carbon being produced per kilowatt hour. 0.2 by 3 gives you 0.6, which is significantly less. It's 60% of the carbon intensity of the data center with a PUE of 1.2. So PUE is no indicator whatsoever of how green something is. It's a very bad metric. There is another metric called the CUE, the carbon usage efficiency, but it's not widely used by the industry, unfortunately. So given that, the report that the CDC produced could just as easily have said that your typical HR firm or your typical food and beverage firm transitioning HR to dedicated public cloud could increase CO2 emissions by 30,000. It's just as valid. They picked the number out of the air, and they based it on a flawed metric. So it's just as valid to say it could increase CO2 as decrease CO2. And a good example of this, in fact, is Facebook. Facebook built this lovely new data center in Prineville, Oregon. They opened it earlier this year. Had an unbelievable PUE coming in around 1.08. Highly efficient. They've open sourced it. If you go to opencompute.org, you can get the blueprints for building the data center and the list of suppliers, so you can go and build that same data center yourself. They reduced their energy consumption per unit of computing by 38%. That's fantastic. That's really good. Unfortunately, their energy supplier is a company called PacificCore. PacificCore produces 58% of its power from coal. This is their website. They say it themselves right there. They produce 9.6 million tons of coal from their own mines every year. They also produce another 12% of their electricity from natural gas, so that's 70% they produce from fossil fuels. Plus, they also buy 22.5% of their power from other suppliers. Now, they don't say how those other suppliers generate theirs. So they get at least 70 and possibly significantly more of their energy from fossil fuels. So right there, Facebook's really impressive 1.08 PUE is blown out of the water by the fact that it's all produced using carbon, or almost all. To contrast that, this is a graph of power production on the Spanish grid. I picked Spain because I happen to live there. And you can see that this was taken last Friday, the snapshot. And again, you can get this information from the Red Eléctrica de España. The red bar here, or bar, whatever it is, area, is coal. Comes in around 20%. Green one here is wind, the other is the rest of the renewables put together, except water, which is down here. So on the Spanish grid, carbon intensity comes in around 20% at the moment based on that, plus the gas is another 15 to 20%, sorry. And that's actually bad compared to the same grid 2 years ago. The same grid 2 years ago, coal was coming in single digits, here around 9%. And the reason it's gone from the 9% of 2 years ago to 20% today is because Zapatero, the now former president of the parliament, comes from Castilla y León, which is a coal-producing part of Spain. And he went to the EU and he petitioned for years to be allowed to give subsidies to the coal miners and the coal production in that part of Spain. And last February 2010, he succeeded. And they got €4.5 billion in subsidies for producing coal in Spain, and that's a direct result. It's scandalous. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let's move on. Dublin. I'm originally from Cork, so I'll talk up Ireland for a little bit. Dublin has become a key European data center hub. Most of the big data center providers have significant operations in Dublin. Microsoft have their largest data center outside of the US in Dublin. It provides the Microsoft Live and Azure services for EMEA. Similarly, Amazon are there, Google are there. They all have significant centers there, and they're all expanding. Google have announced a new expansion, as have Microsoft, to their facilities. Unfortunately, Ireland produces 84% of its electricity from fossil fuels. That number is falling as it rolls out wind. It was 87% a couple of years ago, but now it's 84%. So that's not really very green. On the other hand, Apple have announced their iCloud service. And their iCloud service is currently housed in this data center in North Carolina. There's a photograph of it under construction. Unfortunately, this data center gets 78% of its energy from Duke Energy, who get it from, no, they get all of their energy from Duke Energy. Duke Energy get their energy from 78% coal and nuclear. Coal is obviously really bad. Nuclear is also really bad, not just because of the Fukushima reasons, but you got to think as well, nuclear power plants have an enormous water footprint. And that it can often be devastating to the environment around them. But Apple have said, in fairness to them, that they've got a 121-acre site behind them that they're now clearing for scrub to install a solar facility. It'll mitigate a little bit their emissions. A 121-acre solar facility is not going to completely power the plant, and it certainly won't power it at nighttime.